Thanks, Haas. Welcome, everyone. We get the slot of the first talk here in the digital stage at STEP 2023, and I have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing someone who's had an illustrious career in the music industry and also in tech. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. How are you doing?
So we had a brief chat. You're familiar with the region because you've had such a sort of, your career has taken you all over the world. Can you talk a little bit about, who you are and what sort of career you've had up until this point?
Well, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I started off doing IT consulting. So I did IT consulting for energy companies in the region for about 10 years, and music was always a hobby. So in about 2008 or 9, I had the opportunity to pursue music as a career. So I sort of set myself the goal to see how far and how wide, I could stretch my hands and create context for Caribbean culture, specifically Trinidadian culture, through music. And did that for about 10 years or so. And also was able to expand into visual arts, film, music, in terms of being able to spread the word about what we were doing in the Caribbean, not just to the diaspora, but to other regions as well. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I got back into the tech space, speaking at Slush, Collision, and a couple other places on the intersection between creativity and technology, and how can creatives use the tools that are available to them, and how can technologists create the tools that creatives need in order to succeed.
Amazing. So, looking at your career and doing a bit of research, one would be forgiven for calling it in stages. You studied, you did IT, you opened a bar, you got into music, you were part of anyone who knows anything about music has heard of Major Lazer and the type of work that you've done in sampling for Beyonce, the tracks that you guys have done with Justin Bieber has got billions of views online, and then now tech. But actually, if we look back, the IT part was always there.
Yeah.
Did you study that, and was technology was something that you were passionate about when you were younger?
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in a house where we had a computer, and my dad had a computer, my dad had a hi-fi system, and he allowed us free reign over both of them. So that sort of molded my interest from a very young age. But yeah, I just always grew up around computers, always grew up around music. So Trinidad is a place that has a rich musical culture as well. So it was just part of my upbringing.
And can you talk a little bit about the music culture in Trinidad? Can you explain how that is part of life there?
Oh, it's a huge part of life. I mean, we celebrate Carnival every year. In fact, Carnival, today's Wednesday?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Carnival just finished. So yesterday was Carnival Tuesday, which was the climax, the big parade that we do every year. And we create new songs every year, hundreds of new songs every year. And we have the steel pan, which is the only instrument that was created in the 20th century. And we continue to create music and to influence carnivals and cultures all over the world. I think that Brazil is probably the most popular carnival, but Trinidad has had the greatest influence in terms of being able to create festivals at Labor Day in New York, Caravana in Toronto, Notting Hill in London. Yeah, these are all based off of Trinidad Carnival. So I mean, music culture is a big part of who we are.
Amazing. And obviously, genres in music can be quite nuanced and can develop over the years, and different terms can kind of pop up and be popular at different stages. Sort of 10, 15 years ago, when you were sort of doing this on the side and playing around with it, I guess, did you know what genre you were getting into? And, did you then decide that you were going to become a DJ?
I think the idea of genre is pretty new. That's not something that I really grew up with. There was hip hop and dancehall and R&B and reggae music, and there was soca music from Trinidad, and we make our own music. But this idea of having to make music that has to then fit into a specific category so people can understand it is something that is fairly new. That I think that the whole idea of having to have genres and subgenres and sort of really tie things down and narrow them down only really came to the fore probably within the last few years with the streaming services and so on. And I think that was sort of like a iTunes thing, that
Yeah.
everything had to have a genre, in that when we first started making music and touring and producing and so on, it was very open format. We were playing some hip hop music and we were playing some dancehall music and some bouncier club tracks and so on. But there was never really this sense of having to have a specific name for it. It was more, what is the emotion you're trying to convey? What's the feeling you're trying to communicate, as opposed to trying to put yourself in some kind of box.
Okay, fair enough. Step Conference, this is the 11th year, and if we were sitting on the stage 11 years ago, the music industry was in a different space. It was at the time, it probably was at the bottom of the disruption, and now as it's disrupted, for good or bad, it's changed over the years, and that was kind of coincided with your career. How did you view that, being on the inside of creating music while it was being disrupted?
I think that creation is disruption, and I don't mean to sound like a soundbite, but
it's a good soundbite.
It is. Somebody's talking, or is it am I hearing myself?
Is someone talking? No, I think we're good. It's
okay.
Just the crowd. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about it is that as a creator, you don't really have any control over, external circumstances and external influences. You just sort of have to figure, well, okay, how am I going to add to the stream, to the river, to the ocean that is, creating culture. So it is a constant disruption. It is a constant challenging of the norm, and what I would have liked at 10 years ago may not necessarily appeal to me in the same way that now that it would have then. And what I would have liked when I was a child may not necessarily be what my parents or even the generation before me, my older cousins and family may have been interested in, so music is constantly evolving, creative work in general is constantly evolving, the type of content that we consume is constantly evolving. So I think that being able to create in the midst of disruption is probably one of the most comfortable feelings, because it's really about looking at the technology and the tools that are available to you and saying, okay, cool, how can I use these things, to do something that's new and interesting and nobody's ever thought of before, in the same way that the guys in Jamaica were able to make dub music in the 70s using tape delays, So disruption is fundamentally taking what, again, somebody else has created and said, okay, cool, here are some tools that I've created to do this, and then somebody comes along and says, oh yeah, but I can also use that to do this as well, and they can then create something far more interesting, and then somebody else picks up on that, it becomes part of the mainstream ethos, and then it continues to evolve. So I think that the disruption is constant and is ongoing, as it is specific to music streaming and so on. Obviously within the last 10-15 years we have really seen an evolution in terms of how people acquire and consume content, specifically music.
Yeah.
And even now that is continuing to evolve. There are people who are stepping away from the big streaming services of the Spotifys and the Apples and the Deezers and so on, and they're finding new ways to sort of
create and
communicate directly with their audiences, and regain ownership of their audience. So the disruption is constant.
Amazing, and kind of that allows us to sort of think of how you're thinking now, and we'll get to what you're working on at the moment. But so if you're answering like that now, you were obviously aware of disrupting while you were doing it. There's a documentary on Netflix about the early days of Spotify. It's translated, it's dubbed, it's really good, and each episode shows the lens of each individual involved in the journey, Daniel Ek and other people, and they have one artist. She's a talented artist, and she's almost cast aside as the documentary goes on. Did you feel a bit like that? And what I mean by how music disrupted is that now the revenue the music industry is making is a lot more than it was 10 years ago, but the artists haven't necessarily got what they were getting 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Did you feel that, as your career was, when you were really popular with these billions of streams, did you think you were getting the fair share?
I mean, there's, I think, 6 large organizations that run the entire music industry. The group that owns Warner, Tencent, and the other names. I actually read an article on it 2 days ago, but the other names escaped me. I can send it to you. So you have to kind of ask yourself, well, am I doing this to compete with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or am I doing this to change the hearts and minds of people who come to a show and they may have never heard this music before, and now here they are and they had a life-changing experience, So it's very difficult for creatives when we are forced to conflate these ideas of doing something because I love it and I want to share that love with others, and doing something because I make a lot of money off of it.
Yeah.
And there are some that have made a lot of money off of it, and I mean, more power to the two, But it's very there's no middle ground between doing something that you enjoy for the sake of changing lives and doing something because you can make money at it. You kind of have to pick a path, and there's some people that have been able to balance the two, and there's some people who, like the young lady in the documentary, there are tons of musicians and just creators across all different disciplines out there who wake up some mornings and they feel overwhelmed by not having the fame and the numbers and the millions on Instagram and the millions in the bank account and so on, But you have to kind of ask yourself, well, what is my motivation here?
Good answer. It's interesting. David Bowie once said that he doesn't love music. He doesn't passionately listen to it all the time. That music is just a medium for him to express his thoughts and creativity. How do you feel about music?
I would agree with David Bowie. I mean, I think for me, I'm not very good at like inbound, So I tend to mostly listen to a lot of the same stuff over and over again. I'm not really the type of I have friends who avidly pursue new music and new, like you said earlier, genres and so on and so on. For me, it's sort of like if I hear something that I like and I enjoy, I might go into Spotify and see what else is there. But I am not. Again, I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was definitely far more voracious in terms of wanting to explore, wanting to have that adventure. I also think that having everything sort of just immediately available to you sort of takes away from the joy of discovery.
Yeah.
And I have met folks over the last few months who they collect vinyls. I met a young man, an Egyptian young man who lives in Amsterdam, who collects cassettes.
Yeah.
So he has to fly to Cairo and then find these guys who have old cassette collections, and then they go through the collections and so on. And to me, that is a far more enjoyable. The act of finding new content in that way is far more enjoyable to me than, oh well, let me go and see what Spotify recommends for me in terms of new music. So for me, yeah, it is a way to communicate an idea or a thought or a feeling, again, which comes back to, are you doing it because it is something that you love and you enjoy, and again that you want to communicate, or are you doing it because it sounds just like X, and I know that I can make this number of streams, and if I do this much dancing on TikTok and so on and so on, like the mechanics of um, communicating creativity has really changed a lot within the last 3 to 5 years, so I can see a lot of younger creatives and older creatives as well who sort of struggle with being able to bridge that gap between, you know, um, being creatively successful and creating content that will last a lifetime. How do I make a song today that will stand the test of time so that 10 years down the line it will still be profound, 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line, as opposed to something that, you know, becomes sort of like an anomaly, and to be fair, we have been able to achieve both in terms of being able to create music that has been able to stand the test of time and music that has been able to,
Entertain fans and
entertain fans, but also, break all of these records and shatter all of these numbers and so on,
yeah.
which is, again, which appeals to some, so, but again, it's not, there's no formula for achieving both at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. But we talked a little bit about the disruption of the streaming services and the business side of it. And while you weren't focused on that, you were still disrupting in how you produced music. And I don't know the industry that well in the technical side, but I imagine why the top artists in the world you collaborated with is because you were doing something original. What role did technology play in the production of music that you worked on?
I mean, it plays a huge role, but again, we need to separate ourselves from the technology and recognize that it is just a tool that is available to you in the same way that the phone in your pocket is a tool or a drill is a tool, and you could have, the latest cell phone, but if you don't have reception, you can't make a phone call. You could have a precision toolkit, but if you have butterfingers, then that's not really going to be of much use to you, So it's less about what is the technology that is available, and it's more about how you use the technology that's available, and it's more about what are your intentions, So if you are really trying to do stuff that is new and exciting and fresh and is challenging, and you can find ways to communicate that, then you will find yourself aligned and supported by and surrounded by people who are also interested in doing things that are new and fresh and exciting. And I think that is what, at the time, made us so appealing to so many of these large acts from across North America and the world, because we were doing something that was interesting and exciting, but doing it in a very authentic way as well.
Interesting. Some of the things that you do now, Chris, are you're a mentor for tech stars for music. You're linked with Volta, which you can describe better than me, but it's a VR extended reality sort of startup. And then also on another side with Endel, is a neuroscience data-driven. How did you do that transition? And before I skip the whole interview, and before I forget to ask you, how did the Jillionaire, aka the name, come about?
Oh, it was a joke from a friend from years and years ago, and
so it's just a nickname.
Yeah, it just sort of stuck. Yeah.
And so Jillionaire now, and then you're obviously those things that I mentioned. You would be known as like a consultant or a tech music entrepreneur. Is that the position that you do now? And how did you sort of devote your time and energy to that?
The process is very similar to the music exploration space, in that you meet a young artist who has potential and they have a project that they're working on and they want to be able to reach a larger audience, and you do what you can to help them, whether it's some production on a track or releasing a single or just connecting them with other people in the space. And in the startup tech space is similar. You meet young founders who are driven, and as long as somebody is coachable and they understand that either they must have the motivation and the drive and the focus to succeed, and B, that they must understand where they must let go and build a strong team around them to do the things that they may not necessarily be strong at, and then they can put those two things together and they can build a company that is scalable. It's pretty much the same. It's analogous, it's a one for one situation. So that's why I focus mostly on idea stage and very early stage uh, founders, because these are the guys who I think sort of can benefit most from the insight that I may have to offer and the relationships that I may have to offer. I mean, by the time you get to a $75 million valuation, you're doing, a couple $1 million in monthly recurring revenue. There's very little that I can do for you as a mentor, but working with guys who are, starting from scratch, has really been, enjoyable to me, because it's a similar sort of exploration and growth process that you have in the music space.
Interesting. And from the mentorship point of view, as you started that answer in terms of musicians, when they're young, they might make mistakes, so they need that guidance. But then there's, those two startups and more that you're involved with. How do you divide the time? Like, one could be a mentor from a music background, and the second is more sort of how to run an innovative startup as well.
I think right now I probably have about a dozen companies in my portfolio that I've been actively involved in at some point or the other, and it's just sort of, it's thesis driven, and the thesis evolves over time, but then it's also process driven. So there are questions that you're going to have to ask yourself in terms of, what is the product that I want to build? Who is the audience that I'm building it for? Is it defensible? What is my exit strategy? Because I think that a lot of people don't think about that. Are you trying to build something? Are you trying to build a tool? Are you trying to build a product? And if you're trying to build a product, is this a product that you're trying to sell? Who you think is going to buy something like this? Are you trying to go public? So when you sort of begin to ask yourself all of those questions, and you sort of move down the list, and you have a better idea and a better understanding of where you need to be, how am I going to scale? Am I more technically sound? Am I more of a marketing person? Am I more of an organizational person? Who am I going to have to bring in on my team? What sort of other mentors and advisors am I looking for? What sort of funding am I looking for? Do I want to focus more on angels? Do I want to focus on targeting the large venture companies? I mean, the thing about it is that in this environment, for instance, funding is very difficult to secure. Do you have strong financials? A lot of people have great ideas, but they don't necessarily have even a rudimentary understanding of not just what are the mechanics of the business, but what are the financial fundamentals of the business. So if you can sort of get people to go down that list and understand those things, then at the end of it all, they may realize, hey, maybe A, this is not for me, or B, I need to find a way to pivot quickly into something that is going to build a viable business that I can then go out and fundraise on, and I can go out and make profitable. So in terms of spending my time, if I'm going to take on the responsibility of mentoring somebody, that's why I don't really do a whole lot. So I may take on 1 or 2 companies a year, because I understand that within that first 3 to 6 month period, it's going to be very hands-on, in terms of what are your growth metrics looking like? What are the milestones that you want to hit? And how you're going to go about achieving those milestones? And then if you don't, what comes next? So it's I wouldn't say it's time consuming, because it's something that I enjoy, but at the same time, you have to be ready to dedicate the time to it. And whether that's a phone call once a week, or a Zoom catch up, once a month, or whatever it is, you sort of find a way to fit that into your schedule so that you can be effective.
Brilliant, interesting. I really like how you describe that as, thesis driven and process driven, and understanding the relationship between both. What's your current thesis and what you do? What are you looking out for? What are you excited about?
I think that I've always been focused on solutions for the 99%. In other words, products that the average consumer can easily understand
Yeah.
and use, and tools that can be applied, whether we in this region or we across the Caribbean, across the Africas, across South America. So right now, um, I've most recently, for instance, been working with a company in Nigeria that they just built a big crypto trading platform, but now they're doing gift cards. So it sounds innocuous, but it's actually quite interesting to me at least, So they have a gift card exchange where if somebody gives you a gift card and you don't have any use for it, then you can go on there, you can sell it, and you can use the money to buy something else. And the whole idea now is that how do we expand that so we can say, well, um, every little store, every small business restaurant now
Yeah.
can build a gift card incentive program, which they can then use to grow their audience, and then they can in turn use that as a flywheel to grow their larger audience, so then they can reach more users, etc., etc. So there are ways to sort of not necessarily pivot that business, but expand it beyond, the initial into something that is has far greater reach, and eventually use that as a tool to assist people that may be unbanked or underbanked. So you don't have traditional banking resources to go get Apple Music uh, or Roblox or whatever it is, but now we can create this system where, for 50 American dollars, you can go get your Roblox gift card or your Apple Music gift card or so on, and then you make those goods and services now available to a larger cross section of the population who may not necessarily have been um, privy to that before. So that is sort of an example of something where I feel fits into that it's a large market, a market that is ripe for opportunity,
Yeah.
and a market that can reach 99% of people in your room at any time.
It sounds like it's suited to emerging markets as well. It's quite interesting that you're also working in Nigeria and looking at startups. It makes the what you do very global in
Yeah.
your approach.
Yeah.
And so, just a little bit on music. How do you think the new technologies like virtual reality, mixed reality, and AI? Maybe that's too broad a question, but particularly first, if we focus on mixed reality, from the layperson, seeing music videos being done in a virtual reality production point of view, like, do you see many more trends? Is it sort of hit and miss? Is it going to go mainstream?
Again, it's a tool, so it's however you use the tool. So
Yeah.
I think that it's great that there's so much. It's a very noisy space, and I think that out of that noise, there's obviously going to come like the one or two big viable ideas,
Okay.
but for right now, there's tons that's happening in VR. I mean, I personally, I'm not. I have a headset, but I don't. I'd much rather do this than be on the headset. But at the same time, it is a way for people to reach new audiences. It is a way for viewers and users to interact with content in a way that they may not have been able to interact with that content before. So again, it is a tool that is available, and in the same way that at one point drones were a tool, and then shooting drone footage was like an oddity, and now shooting drone footage is just another part of the process. It's going to be something similar where AI was an oddity, and then now everybody wants to use AI for everything, and then that's gonna burn off. And the thing about it is that when we look at technology, it's sort of like a comet, right? But for the most part, we really concern ourselves with the large, bright, fiery ball of what's brand new and exciting and so on, not realizing that there's a whole long tail of things that's going to come after that are going to
Yeah.
have a far more greater long-term impact than this big exciting what is in front of me right now inside of these VR goggles and this Travis Scott concert or whatever it is, and that stuff is great in terms of a proof of concept,
Yeah.
but as you move along past proof of concept, there's going to be so much more useful day-to-day practical applications that are going to come out of those big ideas. And that for me is the stuff that I think is probably not as exciting to the bleeding edge or the lay person, but has a far more profound long-term impact.
Interesting. But so a bull case for the metaverse would be that it replaces the internet, right? That the 2 billion users or whatever they're on Facebook will start having headsets like we have smartphones. And in that scenario, in the music world, that means that Spotify will be redundant, and there'll be another music thing that will be able to upload as artists for the metaverse. If that happened, how would you approach it, and how would artists approach it, and how would you approach it as a mentor?
Well, when that happens, I think we'll have to have this conversation again.
Yeah, it's not happening right now, obviously.
I mean, it is happening right now, and there are a number of people who are trying to create licensing and product engagement tools for virtual reality, and again, eventually, those things will become viable. But when you think about it, a lot of the technological advancements that we've seen within the last 10 to 15 years have only really come from the fact that we have a smartphone that's small enough to fit in our pockets. So until we get to the point where, these headsets are practical enough where everybody can have one of those and they don't feel like an idiot walking around wearing them, then,
Okay.
it's again, it exists, but how do we achieve mainstream adoption is going to be, that's the challenge that I think that we need to address right now.
Yeah. So, without specifically speaking, I really wanted to. I think we're running out of time. I wanted to ask you about Endel and neuroscience and focusing and what you're doing there. But if I just make it a general, more broader question about AI, it's obviously the hot topic. It's palpable. People are getting funding for writing ideas on napkins. It's that sort of buzz. It's where we were with crypto a couple of years ago. But for people who are afraid of AI in terms of replacing jobs in content creation and ChatGPT, what ChatGPT 4 and 5 will do, do you think that AI will be writing all the music songs, all the videos, and that it'll make a lot of artists redundant?
You get the culture you pay for, right? So if that's what you want, then that's what you get. I mean, like I said, the tools have always existed. The sequencers have always existed, and the keyboards have always existed. And I think that one interesting example, for instance, is those little Casio keyboards, right?
Yeah.
And Casio made those keyboards in Japan in the early 70s, and music producer in Jamaica got hold of one, and then he was able to use the presets on the Casio to create the iconic sound of electronic dancehall music that was able to blow up in the early 80s. And then you had this whole musical and cultural revolution that came out of that. Is it that the Casio keyboard replaced live instrumentation? No. So is it that artificially generated music is going to replace human generated music? No. I mean, for some things, for jingles, for ads and nonsense like that, yeah. But again, are you trying to create something that is going to stand the test of time and it's going to be here in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? Or are you trying to, again, make a jingle for a 4-second YouTube ad? You're talking about two different categories, in that the philharmonic orchestra still exists, and people, and the ballet still exists, and opera still exists, and the violin still exists, and the piano and the guitar, and it's like, as much as if you have a young child at home, you still want them to go and learn to play tennis and learn to play the guitar and learn and go to dancing and football and all of these things, that require use of the mind and use of the physical body, and you can create the right balance so that we can do both, and not just say, well, you got to learn how to play video games,
Amazing. You get the culture, you pay for it.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're unfortunately out of time. And maybe I'll give you guys like a 10-second kind of wrap up.
Do we have any time for any questions?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
But if you have any questions, of course, for Mr. Chris, you can definitely take it outside. But if
Just
you want to close up with
last 10 seconds. So, this interview was all about how you've innovated yourself. You're doing the current thesis at the moment. If we interviewed you in 10 years' time, will you still be a mentor to tech and music startups?
100%.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
For this morning, and I really enjoyed it.
No problem.
Make some noise. I think he deserves.